Okay, so today we're going to talk about autism, and it's going to be part of a three-part series where I talk a little bit about autism, ADHD, and the combination of those two things, which is called AuDHD. This is a relatively new area of psychology that we've started looking at as the awareness around the different forms of autism, the different forms of ADHD, and the different forms of what are typically presenting people have changed over the last decade or so. My name is Charlie. I am a behaviour analyst, a board certified behaviour analyst, and I work with young people with autism, ADHD, learning disability, additional needs. And I also personally have a diagnosis of ADHD and a diagnosis of autism. So I am what you call an AuDHD person. So autism is a set of conditions that can present in a variety of ways based upon your ability to function cognitively. So if you have a relatively typical level of cognitive function, you can have autism and you can present almost like a typically developing person does. Autism is an epigenetic condition, which means that it is partially genetic and partially environmental. So you have a genetic predisposition towards getting autism, and then the environment brings this out of you across your development as a child. And the common and historical view of autism has been that it is a comorbid condition with a cognitive disability, such as learning disability or another form of additional need like what we call developmental delay, which is often not going through the stages of development at the rate which a typically developing person does. Our understanding around it has gotten a lot better over the years because we now understand that it is more a different type of person from the typically developing person rather than a disorder or a condition which is causing them to have some kind of decreased functioning. Instead, people with autism have an increased ability to systemize and follow logic-based systems, but a decreased ability to engage with intuitive, empathy-based systems such as affective empathy and the recognition of other people's emotions, often from non-verbal behavior. So, autism can be defined within the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual 5, which is the American diagnostic manual used in psychology to diagnose mental health conditions, developmental disorders, all things to do with the mind, as a set of restricted, fixated interests. So very, very small number of very high preference interests that interact with the environment. So you might prefer to do something that you like a lot, and you might be able to do it a lot more than the average person, but you might have a less wide range of those interests to engage in. And this can have secondary effects such as a decreasing in motivation to engage in your most preferred things due to the fact that you are over engaging in them, which can mean that you get a lot of changes in your motivation levels. Autism also is an increased ability to systemize and a decreased ability to empathize, which doesn't mean you don't feel empathy. It means that you might not recognize emotional things quite as quickly or as fluently as a typically developing person does, and you may simulate the ability to do that using very logic-based systems around how people have historically acted with you and how you have learned to respond inside of those situations so that you can compensate. We call these compensatory mechanisms. Okay? So autism is all around us. The best description that I can give for it is it's a different type of brain which tends to engage really well with logic systems, which means that in our very constructed world, where we have built a lot of logic-based systems around us, it can mean that we over-rely on these systems and don't generalize our skills into novel environments or novel settings without specific practice or preparation to do so. So I, from my own personal experience, was not particularly good with people when I was younger. And because of this, I went into psychology. I learned a lot about behaviour by going into applied behaviour analysis and working with people with additional needs. And eventually I learned to compensate so that I can recognise the things in other people that a typically developing person would naturally recognise. So from the outside, when I am doing what is called masking, I appear to be very typically developing. When I am not attempting to control my affect, not showing a different version of myself which is more acceptable to society. I seem very autistic and quite robotic in some of the ways that I process different forms of information, even though it's not a robotic process. Like, it still has a lot of motivation tied into it. It's all based around what I want, and often what I want is to engage with other people. I may not always have the tolerance to do that for quite as long as everybody else, but I have built that tolerance over time as I've become more aware about the things which are limiting me in my day-to-day. So autism can be very routine. You often like following your routines and you want to fulfill them, and you get a lot of motivation around following set, easy to perceive and easy to predict systems, and you become overwhelmed when systems are not particularly transparent, and you might find it very difficult to read subtext from a situation without having it either explained to you or without having learned specifically what that situation is and what the potential outcomes may be for different people. So the reason why I'm breaking this down into 3 different sections is because autism is often, from my perspective, a bit of an opposite to ADHD. ADHD is around attentional control and the ability to use and manage your attention and prioritize, whereas autism is more about your motivation, your restricted interests, and your ability to follow systems. Autism can be a big challenge for the people who have it when it is in isolation, even if there is no cognitive change in their ability to process, because they may be able to handle logic-based systems very easily, but when those empathy-based systems or those intuition-based systems kick in, you often don't have a lot of the tools necessary to be able to adjust or adapt to those things when you're inside of a natural environment. And this is why people with autism often require additional support. There is something which requires a structured teaching method to teach things which often are naturally taught to a typically developing person when they are much younger. So that's a very simple breakdown of what autism is. There's obviously a lot more that goes underneath that, and how it may affect processing, how when you get a learning disability or a developmental delay condition, what happens to a person when those two things are put together. And also, it means that how a person with autism is raised often affects their ability to develop new skills and build skill sets which will help them to compensate for the difficulties that they're going to experience in life. I'm very interested to hear about any questions people have about this area. For me personally, I have found my autism a little bit easier to deal with than my ADHD, because autism it's just a different type of life. If you like systems and you notice them and you think about them, you can optimize them in a way which is very efficient. And it may be that you have certain advantages over the typical person if you choose which industry you're going to work in or what discipline you're going to learn about very carefully to match with that interest in systems and ability to manipulate them when you know how they work. ADHD, on the other hand, can act as more of a barrier because it leads to a decrease in your ability to control your own attention, which we will talk about more in the next episode. So, thank you very much for listening. I'm really interested to hear other people's experience and anything that they have to use as counter-argument against anything that I've said here, because, I am quite educated in this area, but it's always an experiential process learning about the off situations or outliers in a particular body of research. And I am more than willing to say that my own experience is individual, and that while I might have some professional experience which informs my understanding about how autism may work across different people, even having that, it is an imperfect process for someone from the outside to be able to define how we are all the same or are all different. And mistakes can be made. We are, we're all human. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and looking forward to speaking to you soon.